Thank you, David. Our speaker today is Doug Mann, the Democrat who is running to represent District 50 in the Missouri House. Welcome, Doug. Please introduce yourself and tell us about your campaign.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I also want to thank my wife for being here. When we get to the question and answer portion, if you want the complete, true, unvarnished answers, you might want to ask her the questions instead of me, because as we all know, spouses can be brutally honest from time to time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my background, a little bit about why I'm running, and then the issues that are the pillars of my campaign. And then I'm hoping to leave a decent amount of time at the end for questions. So I am not a native Missourian. I was born in a small town in Western New York, about 45 minutes south of Buffalo. It's a town of about 8,000 people. My mom was single for much of my early childhood, and I experienced a lot of the hallmarks of American poverty growing up. My mom then came out as a lesbian when I was 11 years old. So we experienced a lot of the hallmarks of bigotry early on in my lifetime, especially growing up in a small, very red town. You can imagine what it was like for my mom to come out and things that I experienced at school and such because of that. But my mother always stressed education to be very important. My wife would argue that she may have stressed it a little bit too much in my case. And I graduated high school, and then I went on to college, and I got a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in education. I then moved to the city of Chicago, where I taught on the Southwest side for 6 years as a history and civics teacher. I was also the liaison for a program called Democracy Schools, which is a program funded by the McCormick Foundation in Chicago that helps to get young people more civically engaged. This included having programs where the students would pick issues, advocate on behalf of those issues. We did a collaborative with the Museum of Modern Art, where we used art to kind of advocate for social issues, and students learned a lot and got a lot out of it. I also coached wrestling while I was there, so lots of experience trying to give back to the students as much as I possibly could. While I was in Chicago, I got another master's degree from the University of Illinois in Chicago. I got a master's degree in public policy. And then after that, I decided that I still wasn't done going to school, much to my wife's chagrin. And I applied to law schools. This was always something that was in the back of my mind to do, but I was never really in a position financially where it made sense for me to go to law school. But my wife was nice enough to support me through that process. And I applied to schools and ended up accepting Mizzou Law as the school that I would attend. And that's what brought us here to Columbia. And much like a lot of people that I've met since moving here, came here for Mizzou, got sucked into the community. The community has been very warm and inviting to us, and we decided that we would stay. Now I work as a civil rights attorney at TGH Litigation, and we volunteer in our community, volunteering specifically with Big Brothers Big Sisters. We have a pair of littles that we mentor, and really enjoy that. It's great to continue to be able to give back to the youth, because I'm a firm believer that we need to invest and work with our youth in order to promote our future. Now, why am I running? Why did I decide to jump into this foray that is politics, and why do I want to go down to Jeff City with the mess that it is currently? A lot of my political knowledge and political leanings I got from my mother. She was very political when I was growing up. I like to say that she was the squeaky wheel that got things done in our town. And because she was single for much of my early childhood, she would drag little 4-year-old me along to different political events. So I was the 4-year-old at city council meetings, sitting there on my mom, like standing there next to my mom while she railed against something that was happening in town that she didn't like. So I learned very early on the importance of civic engagement and the importance of being politically involved. Much of that manifested itself as issue-focused advocacy for most of my life. As I'm sure that you can guess, because of my mom coming out when I was so young, issues surrounding the LGBTQ community have always been near and dear to my heart. When I was in undergrad, I went to a Catholic university and I was the founding vice president of our first Gay Straight Alliance on campus, which I'm sure you can guess, because it was a Catholic university, was not the easiest thing to get done. For example, we weren't allowed to put rainbows on any of our advertisements, but we got around that by putting Skittles on all of our advertisements, or pictures of Skittles on all of our advertisements. You know, you find creative solutions to the problems. I also, as a teacher, was one of the advisors for the Gay Straight Alliance at the high school that I taught at. I also, since moving here, I was involved in the summer of 2020 in the protests downtown for racial justice, was very involved in that movement, have been very involved in the reproductive justice movement, including volunteering and tabling for Planned Parenthood in New York, Illinois, and here in Missouri, and spending a summer working for the National Abortion Federation in Washington, D.C. On their policy and legal team. So being involved and being politically involved and civically engaged is something that I've done my entire life. And I'm always looking for ways to give back. And I kind of see running for office as a way to give back and serve the community that has accepted me and my wife so warmly. So that's the reason why I've decided to run. Now, the issues that I'm mostly focused on are education, healthcare, and workers' rights. So I'm going to start with education. Obviously, with my background as a teacher, education is very important to me. And as I'm sure that you can tell from the degrees that I have amassed, education is something that I think is very important. And it has really allowed me the ability to move up the socioeconomic ladder from where I was growing up and get to a place of comfort in my life. But since moving here to Missouri, I've seen education be under attack. For example, the culture wars that we are seeing currently in education, discussion of trans issues, discussion of CRT. These are, at the end of the day, things that are meant to try to attack public education, weaken public education. And I firmly believe that we need champions that understand these issues, can speak to these issues personally, and will be able to push back whenever these culture wars rear their heads in Jeff City. And when I look at my time as a teacher, many of the lessons that I taught would currently be labeled as CRT, even though that's not what they are. Like if I dared talk about, for example, Byron Rustin or Malcolm X in the way that I did as a teacher, I would be labeled as a radical that's trying to indoctrinate the students, when in reality, all I'm doing is teaching them about the civil rights movement a little bit deeper than Martin Luther King gave a speech and then racism was gone, which is essentially how I feel like they want the civil rights movement to be taught, if taught at all. So we need people to push back, and I think that I'm in a position to be able to push back on that. Also, we need to be funding our schools better. I saw a tweet a few months ago when there was discussion about funding down in Jeff City, and it was a Republican legislator who said that they were meeting their constitutional duty. And the constitutional duty is the bare minimum that they should be attempting to reach. We can do more. We can fund more. For example, here in Columbia, a teacher with 20 years of experience and a doctorate will make as much as I was making in my 6th year of teaching in Chicago, which I know that there's a cost of living difference, but that is an atrocious difference if you understand how the salary schedules work. And Columbia teachers are paid some of the best in the state. So that means that outside of the city of Columbia, that payment is atrocious. And you're going to have trouble retaining and recruiting teachers if you aren't paying them like the professionals that they are. Also funding for things like supplies and resources. The two things that I would say on this is I remember as a teacher not having the funds for a new projector for my classroom. So I had to go and do a GoFundMe. The projector that I was using was being held together by duct tape. You had to like hit it on the side to make it actually show a picture. But I was able to do a GoFundMe, and some fine donor in Texas was nice enough to give me $500 to buy a new projector. And there's teachers here in Columbia, there's teachers here in Missouri that are doing that very same thing, and they shouldn't have to do that. We should be supplying our teachers with the resources that they need in order to make sure that our students reach their full potential. Another thing on funding is that when I talk to parents on the doors, I'm hearing that that list that you get early on in the school year of supplies that you're supposed to bring in, that list is getting longer and longer. It used to be that you had to bring in a box of tissues and that was it. I remember that's what it was like when I was in elementary school, but that's getting longer and longer. And that's just the lack of funding in our schools being pushed off onto parents. And that's something that we can definitely fix to help our young people reach their full potential. Now, moving on to healthcare. My wife she works in community health. So I hear all the time from her the issues that are happening in community health. Yes, Pam? Sorry.
Back to education very quickly. There
Yes.
are lots of things to give out to teachers at the Democratic office. So spread the word to teachers that you know. There are all kinds of things. They just need to come by the office and they've got all kinds of things, free things to give to them.
What was that date again? Is it this Saturday? You mentioned.
No, it's all the time.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much for that.
Till it runs out.
So on to healthcare. I hear a lot about the issues in healthcare from my wife's work. We also hear the issues on the doors, and I've experienced those issues myself. One of the issues is just access, the ability to actually get care. We can make care affordable through Medicaid expansion, different programs like that, but if people can't actually get access to a doctor, it's not super helpful. We need to recruit, train, and retain more medical professionals. We also need to expand the ability of people like nurse practitioners to do their work. Overall, we need to do the things necessary to expand the number of people that are in the healthcare profession to make sure that people can access and aren't waiting 5-6 months in order to get the care that they need. For example, mental health care is something that's very, very near and dear to me, but I know people that have had to wait 5-6 months before they could see a psychiatrist. And that can be deadly if we're being frank about it. If you are in a depressive state and you can't see someone to get the care that you need, that can be a deadly situation for you. On to mental health care, like continuing on with mental health care, we also need to do things to decrease stigma around mental health care, especially with young men. I have had several friends who I have lost to suicide, and if they had just been able to talk to someone, if they had felt safe talking to someone, they might still be here. So we need to do things necessary to destigmatize mental health care and make sure that people are getting what they need. And I would be remiss in talking about healthcare if I didn't talk about reproductive justice. We're all familiar with the Dobbs decision, the overturning of Roe. But it's not going to stop there. If you read the Clarence Thomas concurrence, you know that they are going to be coming after contraception. There's already discussions about the ability to go after contraception. There's also questions around IVF and whether or not people are going to be able to use IVF in order to get pregnant. Reproductive justice has expanded the economic opportunities for people. It has provided people with more social opportunities. And overall, it has made our country better. And right now we're moving backwards. And I want to be a champion in Jeff City to not only be a bulwark and attempt to stop the stripping of rights, but to be a voice to try to replace some of those rights and to put in the work, to put in the infrastructure to eventually get back to a place where you don't have to travel to Kansas or Illinois in order to get abortion care. This is something that is very near and dear to my heart, something that I feel is very important and something that I've been working on for the better part of 2 decades. And I promise to not only be a vote, but to be a voice for those issues. Lastly, workers' rights. I work here at TGH Litigation. It's an employment discrimination firm. So I see the discrimination that workers face on a daily basis. I don't know how much everyone knows about the process if you are discriminated against at work, but the Missouri Human Rights Act is what covers that for the most part. And as of right now, the way that the process goes is that we have to file a charge of discrimination, and then it goes and it sits at the Missouri Commission on Human Rights for about 6 months. I say it sits there because right now they have a backlog at MCHR. They're having trouble getting through everything. And that is very frustrating for my clients, and it puts an impediment to them actually receiving the justice that they deserve. So the way that I see it, one of 2 things needs to happen. We need to better fund the commission itself to make sure that these backlogs don't happen, or we need to shorten that time period, that 6-month time period, so that people can get the justice that they deserve sooner. Also in 2017, a bill, SB 43 passed, which drastically changed the way that these cases are handled, including how you prove whether or not you were discriminated against and the money that you can receive. Caps were put on your set on your verdicts so that you could only receive a certain amount of money depending on the size of your employer. For example, if you have an employer of between 100 and 200 people, you can only receive $100,000 in emotional distress or punitive damages. This was seen as a way to protect employers and to quote unquote make it more fair. But the stories that I hear, there are people that are undergoing more than $100,000 worth of damage from their employer. And the fact that they're capped just puts a cap on justice. And I don't think that that's necessarily fair. Lastly, we need to protect the right to collectively bargain. Right to work was defeated here in Missouri, but it is something that is going to rear its head once again. It's not something that's just going to magically go away. They're not going to stop trying to push right to work. So we need champions, people that understand the language, people that are willing to stand up and say that workers in Missouri need the right to collectively bargain. And that unionization is what helps build a strong middle class, which in turn helps build a strong society. So that is me, that is my platform. I hope to have your support in the general election in November, and I am willing to take any questions that you may have. Yes, Herb. Herb, I think you're muted.
I said, I thank you very much for being here. We greatly appreciate it. We appreciate even more your running.
Thank you.
I must again say I am totally confused by what the legislature did in redistricting this year. And in fact, it confused the hell out of me, to use professional political science language. And would you tell me the characteristics and boundaries of the district you're now running in compared to past and compared to Boone County and whatever it is? So
Yeah.
bring us into the
Yeah, so District 50, it's Sarah Walsh's old district. So Sarah Walsh is currently the person that's sitting in that seat. The seat is now open because she's not running. It used to include all the way down to down through the Ashland area, the southern portions of Boone County. But luckily, my friend Dave Rathel was nice enough to take on those areas. And he will be hopefully attempting to represent those areas. But so now the district encompasses the southern third of the city of Columbia. So the northern portion is between Nifong and Stadium. It's a jagged line, so I just say between Nifong and Stadium. And then the southern portion follows the boundaries of the city of Columbia with small portions of unincorporated county mixed in there. And then on the east side, it snakes up along the boundaries of the city and into Old Hawthorne over there along WW. So it has changed dramatically as far as demographics is considered. It went from a pretty deep red district to now 53% Democrat, which means that the district leans in my favor. But it's definitely going to take work to make sure that in this climate, which we all know how midterms work, midterms tend to go against the president's party, which is not good for us. But it's going to take a little bit of work, but I believe that with the work that we're currently putting in, the doors that we're knocking, the phone calls that we're making, we'll be able to pull out and get another blue seat down in Jeff City.
Thank you again.
Yep. Dave, I see your hand.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. In preparation for the Zoom thing I'm going to do with the Heartland pod people here in a little bit, I've been listening to some of the other programs they've done. According to the flyover that was posted yesterday, Caleb Rowden was interviewed and said that come January, two of the first priorities on their agenda is transsexuals and CRT. On the theory that we're both down there, or on the actuality that you probably will be, what's to be done about people who insist on obsessing with things people want to get away from?
So the goal right now within the Democratic Party is to flip 6 to 7 seats in the House. What that will do is that will overturn the supermajority that the Republicans currently have in the House. As I'm sure that you all know, that will still leave the Republicans with a majority. So we are limited in the actual pieces that we can do, but when it comes down to it, it's going to be about relationship building. There are a lot of people within the Republican caucus who want to get away from that want to get down to their bread and butter issues of taxes and things along those lines. So trying to build those relationships to work across the aisle to hopefully put a stop to that, while also just standing up and being a voice for those people, and making sure that the trans community, for example, has a voice in Jeff City, making sure that teachers have a voice in Jeff City, and speaking to those issues in a way that shows the people how ridiculous these things are. CRT is not an issue in our schools. Teachers are not trying to indoctrinate students. That's just the reality of it. I personally did not know what critical race theory was until I got to law school, because it's a law school issue. So just being able to voice those things and try to show the people how ridiculous it really is.
thank you. I mean, I was trying to throw you a softball. Can I just point out that CRT is really the most fancy developed concept that we learned when we were growing up as kids, when we heard the statement, oh, rich people and poor people alike are prohibited from sleeping beneath bridges. The law's fair to everybody. That's Voltaire, Montesquieu, somebody.
Yeah. I'll attribute it to you, Dave.
Okay, I didn't make it up.
Pam, you have a question?
Yeah, but I do want to say something first. We will definitely have Kathy Steinhoff down here, who is I guess she will be a retired teacher. So I think she can help speak up for education issues and try to make them understand. But I do know their goal is to defund public schools, really. So, but what I wanted to ask you about is the caucus in the House that is the conservative caucus, and they have announced that they're disbanding. So what does that mean toward their goals? They feel like they've won and everybody's going to be really, really conservative, or what?
So I'm not a fortune teller, so I can't really like get inside of their heads and tell you exactly what they're thinking. But from what I've heard, and the way that I view it, they are going to make a play for the gavel. And I think that they believe that they have enough people that they can do that, and that they won't have to be a separate caucus, that they will be the Republican Party. Which means, just like Caleb Rowden said, they're going to try to push forward a more extreme agenda. They're going to try to get these culture war issues pushed forward more and more. And that's why we need voices that understand education to be able to stand up for education, voices that understand workers' rights to speak up for workers. And I do believe, like you said, with, for example, Kathy as a former teacher going down there, being able to speak on education, or Adrian Plank going down there as a union member. These are other people that are going to be able to speak to those issues well, and give voice to those people that people are trying to push back.
When and if you go down there, are you able to get on the committee that you ask for, or how is that decided?
So as a freshman, it's going to be difficult for me to get onto the committees that I necessarily want to get onto. I would love to be on the budget committee, because that's a great place where, as a Democrat, you can actually get things done. But I believe that as far as which Democrats go on which committee, I believe that that will be leader.
Okay, thank you.
Making those determinations. Yes, David.
It's such a pleasure to meet you today, and I'm really glad that you just happened to be in this district that's gettable for the Democrats this year. Really look forward to a victory there. I'm going to continue on the line because that some others have brought up, and ask you, from your background and experience, how you deal with a voter who you're talking to, who is really frightened about what's happening in the schools and the school board meetings, and has been told that critical race theory and mixed sexes in bathrooms and whatever else in sports and whatever else is ruining their lives and their culture in Missouri. We have to do this sometimes too when we're registering people, but it seems from your background you might have just really special ways of speaking to this. So how do we convince these people?
So I'm going to make a to kind of answer your question, I'm going to start by making a pitch for what I think is the most important book that I've ever read in my entire life, which is Rising Out of Hatred, the story of Derek Black. Derek Black was a white supremacist. He was the heir apparent to the throne within white supremacy. He was the person that they believed was going to replace David Duke. And people were able to get to him, turn him, and now he is an anti-racist advocate.
Yeah.
And all of the research that I have read and everything that I read in that book, it starts with empathy. It starts with understanding that those people, they are scared. And whether you agree or disagree with the reason that they are scared, the chemical reactions of fear that exist are happening in their brain. And they are viewing everything through this lens of fear. So you have to start from that point of acknowledging that they are scared and that that fear is real and that that fear is valid. And then you need to build trust with those people. You might not be able to do it there on the door. You might not be able to change their mind right away, but you can plant the seed by explaining to them not necessarily the facts of the matter, but that you do empathize with them. You understand that they are scared, but the way that you see it, trans people in sports is not going to ruin the sport. It's not going to create this wholly unfair place where trans women are absolutely dominating and we have a danger to people's safety. Or the way that you see it, like critical race theory is not necessarily being taught in the schools. I talk a lot about what I taught. I have that experience as someone who has taught in high school, specifically has taught social studies, because when we talk about critical race theory, right, it's going to be the social studies teachers who are going to be the most on attack there. We do see like, oh, they're trying to sneak critical race theory into math or into science or things along those lines, but it's 60% in social studies classrooms where we're going to see attacks on CRT. And just explaining to them, hey, this is the type of stuff that I taught. I know that this is what I taught. I know that this is what the friends of mine are currently teaching. This is what I am seeing in the classrooms. And that this is not CRT. This is just standard teaching American history, teaching world history. But the other thing that I would necessarily plug is that I'm sure that we all have that person in our life that we look at as being the kooky conservative who is all up in conspiracy theories and things along those lines. And it's very easy to dismiss that person and just cut them completely out of your life. And I would challenge you to not do that. Because as someone that has a personal relationship with them, you are the best able to bring them back to the light, bring them out of that darkness by building up your trust with them and slowly but surely reeling them back from that dark place by showing them that it's okay to be wrong, showing them that it's okay to be afraid, but that the facts show that their worldview is just not correct. And it's going to take time. It's going to be laborious for us to do this. But if we want our education system to stay intact, if we want our democracy to stay intact, this is work that needs to be done. I know an example that I will give is one of my wife's uncles went down the Trump pathway. He's a Republican. He and I have had lots of policy debates. but he went down the Trump path, and it was his family that was able to bring him back. And most of these people can still be saved, to use that language, but it's going to take time, it's going to take work, and it's going to take empathy to do it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, that's the direction I was going. As I said, you inspire me with hope that you're someone who can do this.
thank you very much. I appreciate that. Alice?
Hi, Doug. I'm really excited that you're running and to hear that your district is 53% Democratic and you need to get those people to the polls. I too am a former social studies teacher and political science major and have taught in Missouri and in the rural areas. And it was really difficult doing that. But by March, I got my kids answering essay questions, concerned about Native Americans, but it was very challenging. Okay, my question actually has to do with our marijuana ballot issue. I know the Democrats will be voting on that in September. Do you feel like as a candidate with a Republican, a good amount of Republicans in your district, that those of you running for office can take a position on that? I did hear from one candidate, he feels like it's a bad bill. Well, it's the only bill going, and I'd like to let people out of jail. I also just came from Colorado. Anyway, I thought you could comment on that.
So I will say, I think that like we definitely can take a position on it. I don't think that the Republicans in the district are necessarily all going to be against it. I think that the more libertarian-minded individuals will look at it as a personal rights issue, as a private rights issue. I think if I remember correctly, at the meeting last night, they said that the Boone County Republicans were considering endorsing the bill as well. So I think that this is something that we can definitely all get behind. The legalization. We may have issues with the specific wording, as you mentioned. There are definitely going to be things that I think some kinks that could be worked out, but those can be worked out at a legislative level. But I will say that as a candidate, as a broad sweeping statement, I am pro the legalization of recreational marijuana, and I am pro the expungement of those convictions. So, Dave, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to be elated and have a fun time observing that the Boone County Republicans would not affirm that Joe Biden was elected president of the United States legally, nor eschew the lies and liars that say otherwise, but they're all for getting high.
Something that we can, most people can agree on. So
It might help a little.
yeah. All right. Any other questions that people might have? Kathy?
Yes, I was wondering what you can tell us about your Republican opponent. I don't even know who that is.
Yeah, I can't really tell you much because I don't know much because he doesn't have much of a presence. I can tell you his name is James Musgraves. He's a former naval helicopter pilot. He is retired. He lives up in the Old Hawthorne area, moderately well off. I can tell you that the pillars of his campaign, he wants to do away with personal property taxes. He has I will admit, a snappy line in his stump speech where he says that we need to be teaching the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, not the pronouns and CRTs, which I will admit is, it's snappy. I disagree with the sentiment, but you know, someone wrote that definitely knows how to write. And those are the two pillars of his campaign itself. It's big on the back the blue, I think would be the third pillar of his campaign. And that's about all that I can really tell you, because that's really all that I know.
I didn't hear what you said his third pillar was.
Back to the blue.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, I'm just gonna throw it out to you from my own talking to people. There is something of a progressive argument for doing away with personal property taxes at some level. I mean, property's taxed as a proxy for income, but that doesn't hold true as much as it did even 50 years ago. And I've had more than a few conversations from some people who might want to vote for me if they thought I was amenable to some kind of reform. The trick is that it's got to be what I call revenue neutral. When I used that word 30 years ago, people said I was ridiculous, didn't know what I was talking about. But if you read the stuff that comes out of those libertarians up on the campus, they've been talking about some kind of revenue neutral property tax reform. So we don't want to categorically exclude ourselves from the possibilities of that. Just telling you what people have been saying to me.
I would be interested in reading those things if you could pass them my way.
All right. Yes, what I can find. Yes.
Cool. Appreciate it. Herb?
You mentioned a while ago that you would like it if you had a chance to serve in the budget responsibility areas. Sounds like you have the possibility of being another Chris Kelly or Kip Kendrick. And I don't want to get you out on a limb, but did you have anything that you would like to say in general about budgeting and funding and so forth in Missouri that will not get you in trouble?
Well, I will say that, see here, things that won't get me in trouble. That's a good way of putting it. I think, for example, this year with the federal funds that we had, I think that we did a terrible job of actually going through and making sure that those were spent properly. And I think, like, when you have the money, you should be spending the money on things that are going to help the people, not on things that are going to help the wealthy. For example, you have Carson talking about that he didn't want to have those tax cuts for lower income people because it wasn't going to help all Missourians. That's ridiculous in my mind. So when it comes down to actually budgeting, we need to be making A, spend money where it's going to help people, and B, make investments in our future. The whole idea of true change comes when a man plants a tree that he will never see the shade of. We need to be making investments so that our children and our children's children have a bright future. I think that answers your question.
Sounds like good phrases to me. Thank you.
Yes, David.
You've been telling us what we like about your campaign, which is the ideas and the things that you discuss, and particularly the way you're representing them. But tell me more about your campaign on the ground, and where you see the difficulties, the needs, what you're going to try to accomplish between now and Election Day.
We are a ground game first campaign. Knocking doors is our big thing because data shows that that is the best way to reach voters. And to actually, for the persuadable voters to actually change their minds, that's the best way. Because, like, you can have a piece of mail, for example, but that's only going to stick in someone's mind for about 2 weeks. So you have to be continuing to shove mail in front of their face, which I'm sure everyone here does not throw out their political mail. I'm sure that it goes directly on the fridge. But I see the head. Maybe it ends up in the trash. We don't know. But yeah, so we're knocking doors every weekend, Saturday and Sunday, 11, like I think Pam said earlier on during the announcements, 11 a.m. on Saturdays and 1 p.m. on Sundays. Pretty soon here, I'm going to be taking a leave of absence from my job, and I'm going to be knocking doors 5 days a week. So that will allow me to reach more voters and talk to more voters, but we're always open and willing to talk to volunteers and more people to go ahead and knock those doors and talk to voters. Yes, David and Mallory.
Yes, speaking of door knocking, then I take it originally when you were in the primary, you were focusing on Democratic voters. Now you're expanding that scope, I guess, and reaching more people in neighborhoods.
Yeah, without getting too wonky into van scores and all of that fun stuff, we are in what we would call the persuadable universe at this point. And what that means is that we are talking to some people that are, I guess I would use the term Republican light. We've talked to a couple of people who are, talked to quite a few people that describe themselves. They will say, I'm a conservative, but I will not call myself a Republican. There are quite a few people like that in the district that we have talked to. And I think that we've had good luck in talking to them and convincing them that, you know, I am a reasonable person to talk to and a reasonable person to send down to Jeff City. And when it comes down to deciding between me and my opponent, that I'm the better choice. Because we're not going to win the race by just talking, by preaching to the choir, right? When it comes to get out the vote time, that's when like we'll go back and talk to those strong Dems and make sure that they get out to vote. But we need to be talking to those people that are closer to the center, people that are center right, and try to convince them that the things that I want to accomplish and my background makes me the better candidate than my opponent. And we've seemed to have some good success, and I hope to continue to have success in that endeavor. Yes, Pam.
So the governor is calling a veto session, and he wants to cut income tax for everyone. What would you say to him?
I would say that the cutting of income tax for lower income people was good enough, that they don't need to cut income tax for higher earners, that the higher earners have the ability to pay it, and that if he wants to cut taxes, that cutting it on lower income people makes much more sense because of the propensity to spend. We could get into the whole economics argument of it, the fact that people that are lower income are more likely to spend money that you give them tax breaks for, and that's going to be a better engine of economic vitality. I see her nodding his head there. So like if he wants to make that argument that we should cut tax for lower income people, then that's something that I might be amenable to. But cutting taxes on higher income people that don't need that money just doesn't make sense. And he's going to couch it in fairness, but at the end of the day, it's not fair.
We have time probably for one more question, or one more before we have to close out.
Yes, Alice.
Alice.
Colorado, could you describe, I know how we did use our federal monies, the legislature. I know in Colorado, they gave everybody $750. Well, really, it should be more targeted than that. But what did we do in our legislature? And I guess that future special session, if they have it, for tax cuts for the wealthy and the middle class would be part of that. But
yeah, so it was the tax cuts. I believe that we gave pay increases to teachers for like the beginning, for like the bottom end of pay. So teachers, first year teachers are now making more money or are guaranteed to make more money. It was things along those lines that we used the federal funding for. I know that there was a lot of talk about creating a rainy day fund to ensure that we had money for down the road. But we have issues that need to be addressed now. We have infrastructure needs that need to be addressed now. We have education needs that need to be addressed now. And those things are where that money should have gone.
Right. Thank you.
Pam?
Do you have some rural areas in your district? And if so, how do you speak to the farmers?
So we have some unincorporated county. It's not super rural. But I would say in speaking to people in rural areas, I grew up in a rural area. My wife grew up in a rural area. My wife has family farms on both sides of her family. And at the end of the day, I think that it's understanding their issues and being willing to listen. What I found on the doors is that people really appreciate when someone is willing to listen to them and hear their concerns. Because as politicians, a lot of politicians like to parachute in and tell people, I know what you need. When in reality, what we should be doing is listening to folks, listening to the problems that they have, and then working together as a team to cultivate solutions to those issues.
So the ones that you've spoken to, what are they saying they do need?
A lot of it is economic stuff. I mean, to go back to the Clinton days of it's the economy, stupid, those types of things. It's about paying for groceries. It's about paying for gas. It's about making sure that they have the money that they need to get by. Because if your economic needs aren't met, then you don't have the ability to worry about other things. You don't have the luxury of worrying about those other things. I will say, though, that there is a surprising amount of concern around the road decision. We have been saying for years and years and years that abortion will be a galvanizing issue for Democrats, that eventually Democrats will rally around the abortion issue. I think that this is the year where that's actually happening. I think that people on the left have, that it was kind of the Dobbs decision acted as a wake-up call that these rights aren't things that can be taken for granted, and that these rights are things that need to be fought for day in and day out, that just because we won 50 years ago doesn't mean that those rights are guaranteed forever.
Okay. All right, I've got 1:15. Thank you.
David, I think you're
Thank
muted.
you so much, Doug.
Yes, thank you.
I got remuted. I don't know if I punched the button. And next week our speaker will be Dave Rathel. So come back and let's hear from him too. Thanks again, Doug, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all next week.